Hey there, we're just through August at the time I'm recording this, and holy heck, this has been a month for films. Not just because I've watched an awful lot of them, but also there happened to be a film festival, the Edinburgh International Film Festival, and I managed to catch a few movies there. And I'll get into that part later in the video because it is a bit separate because some of those films might not actually be out on general release for a while yet. But in the meantime, here's the films that I've been watching from the comfy seat of my own sofa. And this is a curious wee nugget that popped up on Amazon Prime. Prisoner X tells the story of Carmen. She's like a CIA agent brought in because her ex-boyfriend or partner, which wasn't really clear, killed himself while interrogating a terrorist who appeared in the airport, and apparently is from the future. So Carmen has to pick up where he left off, because how can you stop a terrorist organisation when they literally know everything that's going to happen and can zap back through time to counter whatever it is you're trying to do? So it's up to her to break through and figure out his plans and find a way to save the world, all from this wee underground secret facility. Now, it's fairly clear watching the film that this is a low-budget movie, and I have to be honest, it actually does pretty well with the very few locations that it has, as well as the slightly bonkers premise. And this film's a solid 3 out of 5, I mean it's pretty average. Most of the mystery and intrigue revolves around who has the upper hand in the series of interrogation scenes, and they're pretty good, and Carmen does her best to try and uncover what it is that led her ex-partner to top himself. But the real standout here is Romano Orzari, who looks disturbingly like a young Armand Assante a lot of times during the film, but he actually holds his own as this sinister future terrorist. But yeah, anyway, this film's cheap and cheerful, and occasionally the writing doesn't really make the best use of its premise, but yeah, I had a good time with it. Kind of enjoyed what I saw, and fun, mediocre B-movie. Another film I saw was Guns Akimbo, and I tell you, Harry Potter, or Daniel Radcliffe, certainly has had a weird career after he finished up killing off Lord Voldemort and being the boy that lived. He's gone on to be in horror films like The Woman in Black, and horror comedies like Horns or Victor Frankenstein, but he's also done serious stuff like, that play Equus he's in. But plainly, I imagine that's because once you've spent your youth playing a typecasted role for years and years and it filled your bank account to absolutely brimming, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So why wouldn't you do the exact opposite? And I suppose that's why Robert Pattinson has done exactly the same thing with his career, throwing himself in all these weird sort of roles after the Twilight movies, stuff to prove that he's a real actor and not just like a pretty boy or like some kind of sex symbol for teenage girls and middle-aged women who like vampire stories. But anyway, Guns Akimbo, that sees him as a kind of needy, nerdy game programmer who ends up trolling a dark web reality TV murder game show, slagging off the regulars in the comments. But that ends up pissing off the crazies that run it, and he ends up finding himself in the game show with a pair of guns literally bolted to his hands, and having to go off and do a big deathmatch hunt with Nyx, who's the series championship. And it's really mediocre. Yeah, I mean, the trouble with Guns Akimbo, and that's the term used in films and games for somebody having two of the same gun, one in each hand, is that we've literally seen this all before. I mean, this is basically just Hardcore Henry, that first-person hyperkinetic concept movie, or the Crank films with Jason Statham. So this is very much a poor man's attempt to copy that vibe, only it's not that clever, it's not that funny, it's not as interestingly shot, and the pacing is kind of slow, weird, and scenes kind of drag on, and considering it's supposed to be in this death duel with Nyx, who's a kind of cocaine-fueled psycho woman, every time they meet up she kind of just stands around chatting, and he has ample time to actually shoot her, and I'm not entirely sure how she ever became champion because she's so just lackadaisical about it all. And really the issue seems to be that this is a 2 out of 5 movie that's the brainchild of Jason Lee Howden, who's a visual effects artist at Weta Digital, working on everything from Lord of the Rings to The Avengers to The Great Gatsby, and clearly this is his calling in all favours attempt to make a breakthrough film. And it shows, because although the stunts and the special and visual effects are fairly solid, the plot and the dialogue as well as the scene-to-scene direction are really, really lacking. Now, yeah, this is probably like a Friday night beer and pizza film, but it's not even a really good one, and it's not crap enough to be just, a jolly good fun load of nonsense. So yeah, stick to something like the Crank films, you'll definitely have a better time than with this. There was, however, a return to a more serious kind of film in August with the Mauritanian. Anyway, the one about the guy from Mauritius, which is in Africa. Anyway, this is the true story of a guy called Mohamedou Ould Slahi, and he got arrested in the weeks after 9/11 on account of him once having received a phone call from his terrorist cousin, who was using Osama bin Laden's personal phone at the time. Anyway, he ends up getting locked in Guantanamo Bay and interrogated, tortured, and finally after a change in the law in America, he gets sent lawyers because he's never actually been charged with anything and they can't really hold him without making a charge and putting him on trial. So in comes Jodie Foster and the girl off Divergent, who are both looking into his case and prepping for a trial, while Bumblebee Kumquats is the prosecution army lawyer against them. And you know what? Robert Downey Jr. and Bob Duvall are absolutely nowhere to be seen. Why would I bring those guys up? You know, I just can't remember. Anyway, now this film shares an awful lot of DNA with The Torture Report. That's the Adam Driver film I watched last year, where there was an awful lot of times where you just want the folk off this film to bump into the folk of that film, and so they can all just share details and everyone will know what's going on. But the fact is, as much of this film is about how Mohamedou is stuck there and can't even write about what's happening to him because he's afraid he'll be tortured even more as a result, while the Pentagon and CIA block and redact details of the few documents that Jodie Foster's character can actually get hold of. And this is a total slow burn of a movie, but it is a solid 4 out of 5 film. It's a bit rough to watch at times, and the reenactments of the torture, they aren't gratuitous, but they are kind of uncomfortable, and still, this is a story that's well worth seeing, if only as yet another indictment of how the Secret Services completely screwed up the war on terror. A completely different set of terror is the kind that I felt while watching Shadow in the Cloud. This is a low-budget Kiwi action horror movie that has quite an interesting inception and a bit of history to it. Now, it's a film based on a script by Max Landis, the literal terrible child of John Landis, who also wrote the pretty naff Will Smith film Bright.
Fairy lives don't matter today.
And Victor Frankenstein, which I mentioned earlier. But the idea behind the script was actually from Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Conan the Barbarian, Dark Star and Alien, and he originally envisioned his horror space classic Alien to be a film about a gremlin attacking a B-17 bomber during World War II. But very early into the idea, he actually changed it into being on a spaceship, and the rest is history. So Landis wrote a script based on that idea, only he ended up getting kind of cancelled, and the script got reworked and directed by Kiwi director Rosanna Lang. So the film's about Chloe Moretz, you know, the girl who played Hit Girl in Kick-Ass, which is why you maybe recognise her. And she's an RAF pilot, sort of. It's complicated. But she's on a top secret mission to transport a package from Auckland to Samoa during just a freight run, and at very, very short notice on this B-17 full of grumpy dudes who really don't want her there. So once she convinces them to let her stay on the plane, they stick her in the ball turret on the bottom of the plane, and then proceed to make lots of insulting and lewd comments about her while she gives them a bit of back chat over the radio, until she finally notices,
"There's someone on the way. Something."
Yes, it's a gremlin, literally, like in Gremlins, or that very famous Twilight Zone episode with William Shatner. Now, it's a kind of an interesting concept, mainly because half of the movie is actually just Moretz in this ball turret. It's just all on her, you know, with the voices of the other crew coming over the radio. And that's something that could be done to really good effect. I mean, I've seen that idea done really well in that Tom Hardy film Locke, or in that Ryan Reynolds film Buried. So you can set a movie or a story entirely in a small space with one actor. I mean, basically you're turning it into a stage play at that point. And that would have been really good, only the dialogue was really, really awful. It also doesn't help, though, that halfway through the film, it suddenly turns into a straight-up daft action movie, because clearly they just found a bag of money sat lying somewhere and decided that, yeah, we'll just throw this into CGI and action budget, so let's make this all cheesy and daft and completely disregard physics or common sense or anything that makes sense. Now, I mean, I get it. What happened here was a simple idea, and at some point somebody thought, well, this story's kind of like Alien, and it's got a connection there, but when people think of Alien, they think of Ripley from Alien. But then, when people think of Ripley from Alien, they actually usually think of Ripley from Aliens, so we need to turn this girl into a badass action hero at the end of the movie.
Get away from her, you bitch!
And they do, and it comes out of nowhere, it's completely ridiculous, it's totally unearned, and it doesn't make any sense because she's also doing a whole load of things with her arms, which is crazy because she's already broken a finger and one of her arms during the film, and yet at the end of the movie she doesn't care. And yeah, the whole film just turns into a complete waste of common sense and brain space. So 2 stars, because it does look nice a couple of times, and because there was a germ of a decent idea here somewhere, and a few half-decent moments. But yeah, on the whole, this is a pile of cack. If you wanted to be judgmental though, yeah, I just wouldn't bother. Judgmental. Why does the name The Judge keep popping into my head? Luckily, a film that did actually live up to the hype and was good fun was Boss Level. Now, this is a tongue-in-cheek wee film that's a time loop movie. I mean, you've seen time loop movies before, you know, stuff like Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray has to relive the same day over and over again until he gets it right. But there's actually quite a lot of these films out there. I mean, some of them are pretty serious in tone, there's some of them that are more kind of like comedies, and then there's some that are more action-based, and some that are just downright bizarre. Boss Level, though, as the name implies, is kind of riffing on a computer game style, much like the Crank movies that I mentioned earlier, and the story all centres around a guy called Roy, who's an ex-military dude who wakes up continually on the same morning with the same assassins trying to kill him, and by now he's so used to being stuck in this time loop he literally just makes his morning coffee around the murder. But no matter what he does, he always ends up dying around midday and it resets back to the beginning. But he quickly figures out that it all has something to do with his ex-wife and her new employer, played by Mel Gibson. Now, this film is just straight up nonsense fun. I mean, Frank Grillo is excellent in this, which isn't surprising because he's usually pretty great, and Joe Carnahan, the director, proves that he's once again very, very versatile and intelligent, something that was apparent all the way back when he made the brilliant film Narc, which is honestly just an absolutely fantastic thriller, as well as his later movie The Grey, which is, again, hugely underrated film about basically depression, loneliness and survival. So yeah, this is 4 out of 5 for boss level. It's everything that Guns Akimbo wanted to be. It's funny, it's exciting, it's fun, it's over the top, but it never manages to be irritating, stupid or clumsy. And what's more, if you've got Amazon Prime, it's free, so I mean really, what's not to like about this movie? If you haven't seen it already, check it out. And the last of the Sunday just after Friday movie nights in August was a film called Monsters of Man. Now, I've talked a lot about cheap first-time indie movies over my time, like ones where the creators had some pals out in the woods and they shot a film on a camcorder. Sometimes they had a budget, sometimes they didn't. But in this case, Monsters of Man, which is totally a mix of the jungle warfare films like Predator and Rambo crossed with the fear of killer robots in films like Terminator, or more specifically Short Circuit, which this film is very close to in a lot of ways. And it's all about these corrupt arms manufacturer and Pentagon guys who are collaborating to secretly test robot soldiers in a remote part of Cambodia, where they find a big drug dealing facility and a load of lost doctors happen to wander into the situation to try and help some sick kids somewhere, and they get caught in the crosshairs. But of course, when the robots attack, they go completely scorched earth when they realise that the mission's going to get compromised. But they didn't count on Discount Gerald Butler, like an ex-Navy SEAL guy who just happens to be hanging out there because I don't know. It doesn't really make sense, but he's maybe jaded and cynical or something, or maybe he's trying to find himself in the woods, who knows. But anyway, he helps everybody escape, or at least some of them, most of them die. But anyway, there's a subplot about the contracted programmers who didn't actually know what the job was apparently, and that's also kind of bizarre. And look, this is a dumb film. I mean, it's really silly, it's really basic, but you know what? It's competent, and it's vaguely entertaining, and just because it's decently shot and made, and because you're not actually rooting for anyone to survive, it's a lot of fun watching who gets blown up, who gets squished, who gets shot and stabbed. It's a 3 out of 5. It's a perfect bit of nonsense fun for a Friday night, or indeed, even a Sunday. But as always, I made it down to the pictures a little bit this month, and one of the films I saw was Censor, a low-budget horror movie. Now, this film's the sort of indie darling that horror community in the UK always gets their happy wee faces for. It's a film set in the 80s, it's all about horror movies, or more correctly, it's about the BBFC, who rate and actually occasionally censor horror films here. Yeah, it's really a kick back to the old days of VHS, and it's back in the 80s when there was a craze about what's called the video nasties. Now, that was spearheaded by lifelong puritanical old biddy Mary Wethouse, who wanted to ban basically everything she thought was bad for people, but for reasons I can't really understand, she ended up becoming a minor celebrity in this crusader of the good folks for having grumpy opinions on films and media. Clearly, lunacy of some kind. Anyway, Enid is a censor in the BBFC during that same time. She's introverted, she's obsessive, and aside from all that, she's some kind of hinted at strange past where her sister disappeared as a child and she's repressed all memories of whatever happened. But then while watching some video nasties, she thinks she spots her now adult sister in one of the films. I mean, is she mad? Is that who it is? Is there conspiracy? Well, you don't really have to wait that long to find out because the film's only about 80 minutes long. And frankly, it probably didn't need to be more than an hour. There's not really that much of a movie in this. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's well shot, it's well acted, and I actually like the concept. But the film is really just a short film stretched out too long, and it kind of loses its way and meanders when it shouldn't, and then it rushes to a finale that hasn't quite been earned or built up properly. But, you know, it's still fun and it's interesting, so I'd give it 3 out of 5. And ironically, this is a film that really shouldn't be banned, and it's not really all that nasty. And getting back to horror films, a better, if not quite so unique horror film was The Night House. Now, this is one of those griefy, sad horrors, much in tone with something like The Babadook, or The Witch in the Window, where, you know, there's a sense this could all be something supernatural, or it might just be the mental anguish of the protagonist playing out in a kind of hysterical form of mania. And it's all about Rebecca Hall, who you might remember from Tales from the Loop, and she plays a grieving widow of an architect who committed suicide one night unexpectedly out in a rowboat near their lakeside home. And understandably, she's not really in a good way, especially when she starts to experience weird visual and auditory hallucinations. Or are they? And then she starts to learn weird secrets about her husband and starts finding evidence of an intruder or presence in the house. Or has she? Anyway, I won't spoil it because this is a film that's really atmospheric and it's a really great wee mystery story richly coated in sad, spooky stuff. Although it might not really be the film that the trailer makes out to be, but it is quite a nice, creepy little film, and it genuinely does have a big heart surrounded by blood and veins and other stuff. So yeah, 4 out of 5. And yeah, as I said, if you have seen the trailer, maybe don't get your hopes up for this kind of weird House of Leaves style mazes underground sort of thing that the trailer really bigs up, which is actually not really a big part of the story at all. But yeah, definitely do check it out. And in a completely different tone, I also saw Free Guy. Now, that's the Ryan Reynolds comedy all about him as Guy, who's an NPC in a computer game. That's non-player character to people who don't play computer games. Basically, you know, one of those people in the background that's controlled by the computer that wander around just making the place look like a real place with people in it, like in Grand Theft Auto or something like that? Yeah, one of them. Anyway, one day, he sees one of the sunglasses people, who are real life people playing the game, and he falls in love, and it makes him end up breaking his program because he gets a pair of sunglasses off someone and starts to try and win her heart by being a hero in the game, saving people and taking guns off people rather than killing everyone. Now, in some ways this is kind of familiar because this film's a bit of a mix of The Truman Show crossed with parts of Wreck-It Ralph, a dash of the Lego Movie, a little bit of Eternal Sunshine and the Spotless Mind, and the one film that bizarrely this isn't an awful lot like is The Nines, which is a weird obscure Ryan Reynolds movie that I remembered when I saw the trailer for this, which is kind of strange but actually really worth checking out. It's kind of bizarre. Anyway, Free Guy is mostly just a lot of jokes that feel kind of familiar, crossed with some video game humour, but also stuff about game development with Taika Waititi as the bro who runs the company who owns the game, and a surprisingly large amount of the film surrounds a pair of game devs trying to figure out what's happening to Guy. And this is a 4 out of 5 really good lot of fun, like with a pretty sound moral message. I mean, yeah, it does smack a little bit of improvisational comedy a few times, and there's some scenes where you wish instead of dropping gags, they maybe concentrated on the story just a little bit more, but at its heart, it's just a really enjoyable time. I had a great time with this, I didn't expect to, so yeah, I absolutely recommend Free Guy. It's a lot more fun than it looks on the outside, it's not going to overtax anybody's brain, and you'll probably walk out with a big grin on your face. Now, as well as going to the cinema and watching things at home, another thing I did this month was watch a few films as part of the Edinburgh Film Festival, which was really handy because not only were there films on at the cinema as part of the festival, they also made it really easy to just buy stuff online to watch, so you could actually watch it as well as going to the actual screening. So yeah, let's talk about what I saw. And the first film I saw was Pig. Now, this is a really weird one because it's been advertised in kind of strange ways, and it's kind of a hard sell since basically it's a Nicolas Cage film in a film that on first blush looks like a cross between Taken.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
John Wick, but has a pig in it. So essentially, Nicolas Cage plays a guy who's a truffle hunter who sells fancy truffles, you know, like the mushrooms that grow under the ground, to expensive restaurants in Portland via this posh lad played by him off Hereditary and Old. And then one day some junkies bust into his little cabin. They steal his pig, they smack him around the head with a stick, so he ends up enlisting the rich lad, and they go off to work their way up the chain to find who it was who stole the pig and whoever paid them and get back the pig. Smashing heads, kicking ass and taking names. Only no, that's not actually what it's about at all. There's no smashing heads, there's no kicking ass, and, well, okay, there is a little bit of punching, but actually, no, it's not actually have anything to do in that sort of way, because this is actually a really thoughtful, really sentimental film about people, communication, love, loss, and what's important to you in life, and food. So much about food. So yeah, I'm not really going to go into much more about this, other than to say, it's a 4 out of 5, it's absolutely delightful, it's a really good film that's been completely missold to audiences, but honestly, you should make a point of seeing this. I think in America this has actually already come out, so if you haven't already caught it, I'm sure you can get hold of it quite easily. And in the UK, I think it comes out in the next few weeks, so yeah, honestly, check it out as soon as you can. Pig is not the movie you think you want, but it might just be the film you need to see. And the next one I saw was a little bit different. Martyr's Lane is a proper old-fashioned ghost story, all about a wee lassie in the difficult home life, where her mum's kind of mental, her dad's a vicar, her sister's a complete cow, and she ends up accidentally losing a lock of hair from her mum's locket. But then one night she starts seeing this creepy kid at her window and lets her in. Only then she starts to make her find things around the grounds and dig up little strange packages, and this mystery starts to unravel. Who is this kid? What's all happening? And this is kind of an old-fashioned film. I mean, it feels like a proper old creepy 1980s British TV horror film, like one of these old spooky kids TV shows from the 80s that I used to watch growing up, like The Snow Spider or The Moon Dial and stuff like that. It's really well acted. The ghost girl in it's really great, and she actually really reminded me of that fairy from Legend. I mean, do you remember that old Ridley Scott film with Tom Cruise? Honestly, and also a little bit like Kirsten Dunst from Interview with the Vampire, so yeah. Classic film vibes going on here. And there's a solid bit of spookiness going on. And 3 out of 5, because it's not amazing, And the story's not exactly the most complicated, or, you know, it could have been a little bit tighter and a little bit better written in places, but still not too shabby. So no, Martyr's Lane, it's maybe worth your time, especially if you're into horror. And I believe it's out on Shudder right now. Another entry in the Edinburgh Film Festival was the utterly bizarre Mad God. Now this is a film made almost completely using old-fashioned stop motion, and it was the pet project of Phil Tippett. Who's Phil Tippett? Well, he's the guy who made the puppets, models, and did the animations and effects on loads of films you remember. Basically, he's the #1 stop motion guy after Ray Harryhausen, you know, the guy who started it all back in the day, and Tippett has basically been carrying the torch for this kind of technology, and lots of other stuff for years. And Mad God is his passion project that he's been making for literally 30 years, which makes sense as it's an incredibly huge job for basically one guy shooting it frame by frame, animating all these huge scenes with hundreds of moving parts. And it's completely insane. I mean, this is kind of weird and gory and grotesque and clearly inspired by like lots of hellish artwork and imagery of war and hell and stuff from history. And there's not really a story. This is more like an art piece. It's a kind of a peek into the mind of crazy and nasty and ugly and mad, hence the title. And yeah, 3 out of 5 because, I mean, it's definitely one of a kind movie, and for the sheer artistic value of it, it's indisputable that this is an important film. But it's absolutely not for everybody, and to be honest, I don't even know if I would ever watch it again. But I'm glad that I did watch it. It was an entertaining and different thing, and yeah, one for your creepy goth pal. And next up was another animated movie, although this one was conventionally animated rather than stop motion, and that was Absolute Denial. And this is a film about a programming student who goes off the deep end during his final year at university, and he gets obsessed with building a supercomputer to create a super intelligent AI. And he does. And then it starts chatting to him and teaching, and he teaches it, only inevitably it all kind of goes wrong because how can a human ever outsmart a supercomputer? And this is kind of a quirky wee film with little touches of things like reminiscent of the movie War Games, you know, or maybe more like Ex Machina, where, you know, films where humans speak to computers and realise that computers are super smart but don't really understand empathy or common sense. And this is trying to do something a little bit more cerebral and philosophical, but it's kind of slow and drags a bit, which is kind of bizarre because it's only just over an hour long, so it's both padded and at the same time overly thin, and it really should have just been like a 20-minute short film, not a feature film. But yeah, 3 out of 5, watchable but flawed, maybe catch it when inevitably it ends up being a random thing on Netflix or Amazon Prime down the line a bit. And the last film that I saw at the film festival was one called The Road Dance, and that was actually a premiere. And there's very limited footage of this online, so yep, this is all I got. So, it's a Scottish film set up on the Isle of Lewis in the Hebrides. It's based on a book by local Scottish news reporter John Mackay. And it's just set at the beginning of the Great War, and it's all about a village full of crofters, and this pair of sisters who fancy various boys from the village, and the boys all get summoned off to go to the war. But the night that the men are going to leave, they have a big party. A road dance, and one of the sisters gets brutally assaulted, leaving her both traumatised and pregnant, but unsure of who the assailant actually was. And it's an okay film. I mean, it's not great, it's alright, although I think the problem is that a lot of the whodunit mystery side of things was left on the page of the novel, rather than making it feel like something like Atonement, which is an amazing film and you should totally watch. It just feels like you know exactly who it is from about the first few minutes. And it's decently acted and it looks lovely, but it's a little flat and boring, so 2 out of 5 for this one. Good if you want to see some truly lovely Scottish scenery and a bit of that old world Scottish vibe, but for me, I mean, that's not really that exciting, so nothing to write home about here. And that was it. So yeah, as you can imagine, this has been one heck of a long video because it has been one heck of a busy month in terms of the films I've watched. So yeah, that's why this has taken so long, and I certainly hope that you've enjoyed it if you've managed to sit through all of this. But yeah, August was pretty good in terms of things. I'm definitely feeling out and getting back into my groove on this. September will be a much quieter month. At the time of recording this, we're already halfway through and I've watched hardly any films, or nothing, certainly nothing like as many as I watched in August. So yeah, until next time, these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to all my patrons, and most especially my top tier patrons Judith Coloma, Laurie Laporte, and Michelle Forbes. Thanks guys, everyone keep it real, keep safe, and take care of yourselves. Bye bye.